Welcome all, and thank you for joining this discussion. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces here, as well as some new faces too. Before I begin, please let me know if you can hear me. Fingers up, maybe. Yes, brilliant, perfect. Right, a few messages that I just want to read out before we actually begin. So this Founders Studio session is hosted by Tayo. Tayo is a social enterprise that helps migrant workers live at their best, physically, mentally, and financially, through the Tayo online community and our learning tools. Tayo was a participating venture in the inaugural cohort of the Aspect Student Accelerator Program and was started at the University of Oxford. Just a few notes about the Aspect Accelerator Program. It's a social sciences accelerator designed to support and scale socially responsible students and alumni ventures that contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Great, so let's kick this off. Now, to introduce myself very briefly, my name is Tiernan. I'm a member of the Tayo team, and I'm really excited to be here today to welcome you all and facilitate this discussion. On a personal note, I wanted to give a very quick perspective of my experience working at Tayo over the last year. So we've been working closely with and growing a community of migrant domestic workers, mainly from the Philippines, to explore the challenges they face and what we can do to address these issues. What started out as a small community of London-based domestic workers taking weekly financial classes has grown into a vibrant international community where we explore all aspects of well-being, physical and mental health, as well as financial. It has been an absolute privilege to meet so many people and to hear their stories and lived experiences. Some of us here may be migrants or have family members that are and will know who are migrants and will know how difficult it is to shift your life to another country, maybe leaving family behind and then face challenges in your adopted country. So I can see here in this room members of our Tayo community that have joined the session. So thank you to all of you for sharing your stories and experiences with us. So why are we here? Well, at Tayo, we have certain values that we live by. We always put service to our community at the center of everything we do. We also have a lot of fun. And one of my most memorable experiences of working at Tayo was doing open air karaoke in Regent's Park with our community of Filipino domestic workers. But the two values I wanted to pay particular focus to today are these. The first is learning. We are so grateful that you are all here today and want to engage and learn more about the perspectives of migration and financial exclusion discussed here. We want to give a voice to stories that don't often have a forum for expression, that may go untold or may be presented with a certain slant in mainstream media. If you leave today having learned something new or it's given you pause for thought, then we feel we've done our job. The second value is relationship building. The connections and bonds we've made at Tayo have made us stronger and given more depth and value to our work. So if you enjoy this discussion today, please connect with us and become part of the Tayo community. Hopefully this won't be the last times our paths will cross. So let's now introduce the panel. Tayo's work has focused on the experience of Filipino migrant domestic workers, and our panel reflects this. So I'm very excited to be introducing this group of speakers to you today. So our first speaker is Vida Soraya Verzosa, who is an experienced lawyer diplomat. She is currently the Chargée d'affaires, head of post at the Filipino embassy in Damascus, and so has a lot of experience of the issues facing migrants in Syria. No doubt a challenging but rewarding experience in light of the situation there. Throughout Vida's education and career, she has always been a strong voice for social justice issues. In the early years of her legal career, she worked as a child advocate, devoting her passion to uplifting the lives of sex trafficking victims. As a student leader at university, she worked on various projects to raise awareness on issues such as the education budget, gender-based violence, and Indigenous people's rights. Just to highlight, we may experience technical difficulties connecting with Vida due to the current situation in Damascus, but Vida is very keen to participate, so we are very grateful for her attendance, despite any technical challenges you may face, Vida. Our second speaker is Jerome Alcantara. Hello to Jerome, who's actually joining us from the Philippines. Jerome specializes in labor and migration issues, specifically in combating human trafficking. He is currently the executive director for the Blas, Ople Policy Center and Training Institute, a non-government organization devoted to the protection of Filipino workers. The Ople Center works with stakeholders in the rescue and repatriation of trafficked or exploited migrant workers. The center also provides legal support and socio-economic programs for reintegration back into life in the Philippines for migrant workers. His efforts and expertise have been recognized all over the world, including by the US Department of State, the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, the National Immigration Agency of Taiwan, and the American Bar Association, just to name a few. Our third speaker is Marissa. Welcome, Marissa, who's joining us from London. So Marissa is a close friend of Tayo. She has founded the Voice of Domestic Workers, a self-help group of migrant domestic workers campaigning for their rights and welfare in the UK. The organization also provides education and support to its members. Her work has taken her to the highest levels of government and the UN. Marissa has first-hand experience of exploitation at the hands of abusive employers. She wanted to help others in the same vulnerable situation, and this is what has led her on the path she now treads. Marissa is a proud single mother of 3 who traveled from the Philippines to Singapore, Hong Kong, and the UK in search of a decent living and a bright future for her children. She described that leaving her children behind was the most painful and difficult decision of her life, but she now happily lives with them in the UK. Welcome, Marissa. And finally, our founder, Tanya Aritao. Tanya is a social entrepreneur based in London and founder of Tayo. In 2012, Tanya joined the core team of a social enterprise that provides sustainable livelihood and training for survivors of human trafficking and sexual abuse in the Philippines. Her work there transformed the way she saw the role of business and entrepreneurship in social justice, which then inspired her to pursue an MBA from Oxford. It was there she developed the idea for Tayo. She doesn't know it, but I'm going to say this. She is the real driving force behind Tayo's great work. And I've personally learned so much from her over the last year working with her. She's the reason we're here today and why we're lucky to have our panel of guests here too. These bios, I'm sure you'll all agree, are amazing. Thank you to all our panelists for being here. And thank you to all of you here for listening. Temporary migrant workers, such as those in domestic work, are faced with unseen challenges that affect their social and financial inclusion in their country of work. These challenges are made more complex by the migrants' responsibilities to their family and dependents in their home country. Today, you'll hear perspectives from the fields of social entrepreneurship, grassroots community organizations, and international development. The panel will draw from the work with migrant communities to discuss the key issues, unseen realities, and issues from the pandemic. Right, so let's get started. I'm going to invite each panelist to give a brief presentation of their work. We'll then discuss key themes with our panelists, and finally, there'll be an opportunity for you to put questions forward to our panelists. If you have any questions, please submit them over the chat functionality. If you're struggling with the chat functionality, please hold up your hand. I'll do my best to make sure that we flag as many questions as possible and that we are able to ask them to our panelists. So our first presentation is going to come from Vida. Because of, as I alluded to earlier, the technical issues we're experiencing in Damascus, what we're going to do is show a video for Vida, whereas the other participants will actually be speaking. So brilliant, let's play the video.
Let me begin with the story of Lara. Lara is a 43-year-old Filipina high school graduate who was lured by the promises of a good job abroad. However, when she was transported using a tourist visa by her recruiter through Malaysia and finally landing at Syria, her nightmare began.
Yung ginawang pananakit sa akin, siyam na taon po akong sa amo ko na walang kalaban-laban na sinasaktan. Tapos 7 taon po akong walang komunikasyon sa pamilya ko. 7 taon din po akong hindi nakapagpadala ng para po sa mga anak ko. Kaya ang alam po ng pamilya ko na wala na po, patay na po ako.
Lara was treated like an animal. She was chained, she was beaten, she was imprisoned for 7 years inside the toilet. Her employer would punch her so strong that eventually her teeth would be knocked out. She would be gagged and tied. They would shout at her and maltreat her physically, emotionally, psychologically, until one day she escaped. A Syrian family took pity on her and brought her to the Philippine Embassy shelter. And that is where I met her. That is where I decided that I wanted to help her through this access to justice and legal empowerment program under my Reentry Action Plan. Hi, my name is Vida Soraya Verzosa from the Philippine Embassy in Damascus, Syria. I'm here to talk about my gender equality, visibility, and social inclusion mainstreaming course. My Reentry Action Plan for this particular project talks about how we can do legal empowerment and access to justice approaches that are gender sensitive, victim friendly, and trauma informed for human trafficking victims. I arrived here in Damascus, Syria on the 20th of December 2020. The Philippine Embassy in Damascus, Syria works with the government of the Syrian Arab Republic to prosecute cases of human trafficking and illegal recruitment against the girls who are in the Philippine Embassy shelter. The story of Lara is just one out of the hundreds of other distressed overseas Filipino workers who are right now in shelters in our Philippine embassies and consulates abroad. And thus, the REAP was designed to empower Assistance to Nationals officers by teaching them how to prepare judicial affidavits with a JEDC lens for filing in both Philippine courts and Syrian courts and hold perpetrators of violence accountable for their crimes. As a result of my reentry action plan, all the girls who were repatriated to the Philippines were interviewed and their judicial affidavits were prepared. These were then endorsed to the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, and these cases were filed in the regional trial courts so that we will be sure that the perpetrators of illegal recruitment and human trafficking will be made accountable for their crimes. According to our partners from the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, this is an innovation since it is the first time that the Philippine Embassy has been involved in the preparation of evidence and case buildup in terms of being equipped even at the level of the ATN officers. This is also a very good interagency approach because we were able to collaborate and ensure that even prior to arrival to the Philippines, the girls would already be given free legal advice and they would be assisted in the prosecution side of our anti-trafficking strategy.
Maraming salamat po. Talaga salamat po sa Panginoon na mabibigyan ng katarungan yung mga nangyari sa akin sa tulong po ng Philippine Embassy.
Using the JEDC mainstreaming approach, we want to show women like Lara and other distressed overseas Filipino workers like her that justice is possible even for the poorest of the poor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vida, for sharing that video and the excellent work that you're doing in Syria. And thank you also to Lara, who allowed us to share that story here in this discussion. I'm sure there's so much there to talk about. In reality, how difficult is it to prosecute abusers and exploiters in foreign jurisdictions like Syria?
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you also to the audience for reviewing that story with the respect and dignity for other survivors of human trafficking. So the situation in Syria is very unique compared to the other countries because first and foremost, there is a deployment ban. They're not even supposed to be in Syria. So we treat them as 100% human trafficking victims. So the challenge for prosecuting these cases are to try to balance out what Syrian law provides, what Philippine law provides, and what are the specific evidentiary documents that we can put there, considering that they have problems with Arabic language. Sometimes they don't even have labor contracts at all since they were smuggled into Syria. And the worst part is for them to be able to be repatriated back to the Philippines, they have a system similar to the other Gulf countries called the kafala system. And for this one, basically, they cannot exit the country without the consent of their employer or sponsor or the recruitment agency. So that's the most difficult part. A lot of the time, they're stuck in the embassy shelter if they don't have the exit visa, because even if they reach the airport, they will be offloaded if they are not given those clearances. So part of the prosecution side is making sure that not only will they be able to have access to justice while they're in the foreign country, but when they return to the Philippines after they are repatriated to the communities and reintegrated. And I think that's where groups like Tayo and our colleagues from Blas Ople Policy Center are helping us out, because as an embassy, we're only limited to the things that happen while we're abroad. But once they reach the Philippines, I think that's the bigger part of the challenge that we need to work with. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those insights. And there's a lot for us there to discuss and delve into, which we'll save for the panel discussion. So thank you. The next presentation will be from Jerome Alcantara from the Blas Ople Center.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you to Tayo, Tanya, Mitch, and the team for having us. I think I will be continuing the story of Attorney Vida because we actually work hand in hand with her and with the government. Allow me first to introduce the Ople Center. We are a non-profit. We represent the NGO sector for overseas Filipino workers in the Interagency Council Against Trafficking. So we have this platform where we can really work closely with our partners from government. We have been in existence for 17 years. We're named after the former Labor Minister, Blas Ople, and the organization was founded to continue the advocacy of Blas, as we call him, on labor rights and protection of migrant workers. The Ople Center works primarily with overseas Filipino workers and their families. We receive reports through our social media page, hotlines, formal and informal referrals, and we work with them. We work with government to facilitate the removal from exploitative situation. We provide legal counseling, and we also work with OFWs and their associations, both in the country of employment and in the home country, in the Philippines, so that they themselves can become agents of change and that they can influence policy programs and practices. We work very closely also with government, as I mentioned. We utilize the lessons from the direct support, the direct assistance that we provide to OFWs and their families in lobbying for changes in policies, in programs, and in practices. And we work hand in hand, as I mentioned, with OFWs and their associations to make sure that they have a voice in policy making. And this is where I continue the story of Attorney Vida. We work closely with government partners to make sure that OFWs, especially those who are distressed and who are in exploitative situations, that when they come back, they are effectively reintegrated into society, economically, socially, and culturally. We hold trainings for livelihood. We work with one of the largest food conglomerates in the Philippines, San Miguel Foods Incorporated, to provide returning distressed OFWs with livelihood assistance. I think that's where almost 22 of the repatriates from Syria who were formerly wards of Attorney Vida, that's where most of them were placed. Now we help them establish their own food reselling businesses. Of course, we also understand that not all OFWs are ready to become entrepreneurs. So we also organize job fairs before the pandemic to help find decent and meaningful jobs in partnerships with the companies and corporations who are vetted. Right now, we're excited with our partnerships, with the Rizal Commercial Banking with RCBC, Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation. We are, in our mind, we are facilitating the entry of OFWs into the new economy by helping them establish the local community-based payment centers, bills payment centers through the Discartech app. So we're also very excited with that. It's a new thing for us. The Ople Center also works with employers, with recruitment agencies, with international organizations in trying to change attitudes and practices. We work with stakeholders in promoting ethical recruitment among private recruitment agencies and employers. The rationale for this is that a lot of the work is being done on the demand side, providing OFWs with rights-based orientation before they go home, helping them when they are in need. But we realize that we also need to work closely in changing how employers and how recruitment agencies view their responsibilities towards their workers. That's why we are also working on ethical recruitment. For our discussions today, we identified 3 key issues which we are looking at on the part of the Ople Center. First of all, migrant workers, especially domestic workers, are more vulnerable to trafficking and abuse during the pandemic. There are already layers of vulnerabilities of domestic workers, but we have noticed that there are other layers that come into play during pandemics, but not only pandemics, even during conflicts, during emergencies, during times of political unrest. And also, during these trying times, we find that there are less incentives for recruiters and employers to be ethical, so to speak. And it is because we anticipate, and it is happening right now, a lot of the deployment costs for workers to go out of the country and to be placed, they are now increasing. There's an increase in the cost of transportation, health and safety protocols places additional burden, financial burden on the overseas Filipino workers. And sometimes employers would rather just, opt for them to go through the back doors or go illegally. And that again makes them more vulnerable. For number 1 and number 2 of our 3 issues, our main theme really is that domestic workers, especially those in countries such as the Middle East, who have been invisible in the past, are now becoming more invisible because of these factors. And compounding our woes right now is that economies, we found out, especially ours, are not ready to provide returning migrant workers with viable livelihood. So, and this perpetuates the cycle of poverty and exploitation, because these returning OFWs who can't find work will once again be easy prey for traffickers who will be promising them jobs overseas. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share, and I'm turning it over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive summary and for all your great work that you're doing in the Philippines, especially around integrating people back into life, back home. And I suppose that's another element of the migrant story that we'll be exploring later. That sort of reintegration back into life back home is also part of the challenge, not just being abroad and working in an adopted country. Thank you, Jerome. And next to Marissa, who founded the Voice of Domestic Workers and campaigns very actively here, representing the often unheard voices of the domestic migrant population here in the UK. Welcome, Marissa.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerome, for the kind introduction. And I'm very much love Tayo. So I'm a fan of Tayo, and that's the reason why we have Tayo in the Voice of Domestic Workers regularly. Now, so I work for the Voice of Domestic Workers. It's a community of migrant domestic workers. We are international community. We have Indonesians, Indians, Sri Lankan, African, and but of course majority are Filipinos. Yeah, and our work focus on community organizing and advocacy and campaign. I added one down the domestic workers cooperate, so I will let you know what is that later on. Yeah. So as you can see in the photo, that's they are. I think we I think we heard the horrible stories, yeah, and the efforts of NGOs and governments, you know, to support domestic workers particularly, but in particular. And I think our connection, because we are based in United Kingdom, I think we are a little bit in a better position. And actually our membership are coming from Middle East. Yeah, we also have from Syria, and yeah, we have from the US, from Africa, and yeah, so Europe as well. We work towards decent work for domestic workers. So that's our main goal, yeah, making domestic work a reality, you know, decent work, yeah. So, yeah, as you can see, this is what we do. So I'm also a domestic worker. And yeah, so while I'm saying migrant domestic workers are the backbone of our society, as you can see, we are the carer for children, the carer for elderly. We are in charge of the household, and it's family that made up the society. So we look after the families that made up our society. So without domestic workers, how everybody could go to work. So that's the very important role of domestic workers in the economy. So we allow other work sectors to be able to do their work. Okay. So in community organizing, we do it by providing them this, as you can see. But I think I will put number one, the rescue operation, I think. So what is this rescue operation? Since the very beginning of the Voice of Domestic Workers in 2009, because I myself has escaped from abusive employer. I've been abused, I've been exploited as well. So I know exactly how it is to be abused, how it is to be not paid, to be, you know, to be far away from, especially from family. And yeah, so rescue operation means any domestic workers, usually a majority of them are actually coming from the Middle East, yeah, from Saudi Arabia. They would contact us that they are being abused. So the types of abuse are maybe not as much as that we seen a while ago in the video, but I think to me, non-payment is abuse. I think for maybe because the way the United Kingdom would describe abuse is what we've seen in the video, yeah. And for us, not having day off, not working very long hours of work, that's all abuse. So they would call us and let us know what's happening. So wherever they are coming from, United Kingdom, they could be from Scotland, from Wales, or majority of them are coming from the London. So mostly of them are in the hotels, and some of them are in Brighton, and some flats. I think the rich area of London, actually. So mostly they are there. So wherever they are, whatever time it is, we will go there and rescue them. So they can call us anytime. So we are actually 24 hours 7, our line open. So they can call us anytime. So those domestic workers are coming from different parts of the world and coming to the UK. And as long as they are on overseas domestic worker visa, we can help and support them, because that's later on I'm gonna talk about the campaign, why it is what we could support among the domestic workers. So once we rescue them, we provide them emergency accommodation, clothes, because usually they run away when they have no clothes, food. Because we provide money, traveling allowance, so that they go for interview, for job interview, find job, yeah, they can find another job. And also we do, because we are community, so we just, any of them who has job, who knows job, then they can just refer them. So after that one, of course, we provide them education and training, because when they just escape, actually they're blank, they hardly talk, they're very scared. So I think introducing to them immediately what we have in the voice of domestic workers, I think it's not the immediate one. So, but the education and training is there from the very beginning, because many of them have been cheated with the employment contract designed without knowing what is in the contract actually. So education is a vital part of our empowering them, you know. And so we have ESOL, is an English class. We have also IT computer. We have Body and Mind Wellness workshop, and they dance, they sing, and they have the sharing stories. And also they do some arts, and mostly they also do some exercise. So as you also can see, we have financial wellness, which is the tayo. Yeah, so this is once a month session, once a week. So which members could attend this session. And we also have the MediaCom workshop, and because we need them to be active in our campaign, that they should be able to create their own videos and campaign graphics. Yeah, so I think third will be the services. We partner with Doctors of the World to provide them, to make sure they are registered to health centers, that they can go to hospital when needed. And especially during the pandemic, you know, even those without GP registration, we did our best to make sure they could access vaccine, that they are all vaccinated. But of course, it is also important that they are registered to health centers. So we also provide legal advice. So I think this is the time that they will start to listen already, because they found job already. I think the priority that we will see them smile is when they found job already, because they could provide for their family already. So they couldn't provide. Actually, they never think of themselves. In the heart and mind, their family, even they had nothing, you know, when they ran away, the heart and mind actually the family. So once they got the job, they're receiving salary, then that's the time you will see them smile. And that's the time also they open their mind to other things. So if they need the passport, so we will help them to make an appointment to Philippine Embassy. And also if there is an employment case, then we will look at that. But the absence of the employment rights here in the UK is a big problem. At the moment, they only could go through a national referral mechanism of the trafficking law. This is a very complicated law mechanism to identify whether or not they are victims of modern slavery or trafficking. But this is just a temporary protection for them. So it's not really something that the voice of domestic workers would campaign heavily. But I think later on I'm gonna talk to you about that. But in terms of training, also we partner with Polo Owa. So we have many livelihood projects as well. So our members could access the training livelihood program of Polo Owa.
Great.
Yeah, so this is our, of course, campaigns. We want to change the life. we want to rebuild them, that we want to help and support them rebuild their lives. And at the moment, I think many of them are undocumented. So the campaign, the focus of our campaign, because we lose all these rights, we lost all these rights in 2012 when the government changed. Yeah, so the focus of campaign is to reinstate all these rights. So right to change employer without restriction, right to renew the overseas domestic worker visa. So those domestic workers with this visa are the domestic workers that we are supporting. So basically there are quite many of them. So the latest data that I had from the Home Office was, I think there are over 22,000 every year, yearly, annually, that coming in. However, we do not have data on how many of them stayed. But if you look at also the number from 2012 to now, so it's quite big who managed to escape. Yeah.
Great.
So
Marissa,
the second, yeah, I know, I'm finishing. So the
yeah, just need to make sure Tanya has a voice.
The campaign is as I'm talking, we are more on decent work. Yeah, domestic work is decent work. So we continue to lobby the government to ratify and implement the ILO C-189. This is the international law that protect domestic workers. I know Philippines has already ratified this convention, but I hope they improve the wage, the salary of domestic workers in the Philippines. So these are all the livelihood projects. So now this is our major project coming in the new year. So this is Domestic Workers Cooperate, is a cooperative of our members who are investing in this cooperative project. Yeah, so it's going to be, it's a charity store, but it is separate from the Voice of Domestic Workers. That's a charity, but we use the logo of the Voice of Domestic Workers to create products to sell. So, but I think right now we are more on women and accessories. So this is coming up very soon. So I'm currently preparing this. So this is our contact if you want to be in touch with us. Yeah, so you can go to our website. So if you are domestic workers coming here, feel free to inbox us, and you need help, yeah, you can inbox us anytime. Yeah, so thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for that and all your excellent work that you're doing. Actually, something that, just to give context to any viewers listening, if you hear the term OFW, it means overseas Filipino worker. So we're talking about migrant workers who are Filipino. And also the term rescue here. I suppose it's just worth highlighting. It's not just supporting migrants, it's actually helping them escape from exploitative, abusive relationships with employers. So that will often mean having to, they don't necessarily have the right visa requirements to stay in the country that they're in. If say they're being rescued in the UK, and they have little access to services and provisions to help them escape those situations. So that's where, when you hear the term rescue, it's a very specific meaning in this instance. Right, thank you for that, Marissa, and thank you for all your excellent work. We know that you're doing an amazing job, and we've met so many people from your organization as part of Tayo, and we are in awe of everything that you've managed to achieve there with the Voice of Domestic Workers. And to our final speaker, Tanya, who's the founder of Tayo.
Great, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya, and I'm the founder of Tayo, as Chris has mentioned. We're on a mission to support migrant workers on a journey to financial freedom. And our name Tayo, for those that are not Filipino speakers or Tagalog speakers here, it means we or us. Or if you say tayo, it means to stand, which captures the aim of Tayo to stand and grow with migrant workers, which we do through our online community and our mobile tools. At Tayo, we help migrant workers live at their best. So we think about physical, mental, and financial aspects of living at their best. And we currently work with Filipino domestic workers. In our community, we run regular check-ins with members, learning workshops, and a monthly roundtable, which we like to call our Tayo Collab. To build tools that support migrant workers on their journey to be financially independent, we value building relationships with our community and understanding their lived experience. And this is our foundation for learning and growth in the long run. In the last 6 months, we have focused on building our core community of Filipino domestic workers online. And our community is based all over the world in the UK, Italy, the UAE, Pakistan, Singapore, Hong Kong, just to name a few locations, as well as some retired domestic workers living in the Philippines. We are co-creating programs that help our migrant community learn, grow, and live at their best. I'd like to share 3 key issues that we have witnessed with our migrant worker community and their challenges with financial inclusion. Despite consistent and increased flows of income from migrants and working their whole lifetime abroad, this doesn't always translate to midterm or long-term financial stability. Many workers will still retire or end their working careers without a retirement plan. They say that 60% of overseas Filipino worker families remain at a level of poverty or need. And we see migrants who work 30 years abroad, work their whole lifetime abroad, who have provided consistently for their families, stable throughout the years, yet they return home without a plan for what's next. And this then shifts responsibilities to other members of the family who may or may not be prepared for this responsibility, which connects to a second key issue that we see, which is a challenge of shifting from a short-term perspective to longer-term perspectives when you're thinking about managing your finances. As you have seen from other speakers, temporary work really makes this aspect difficult. Many workers don't have contracts that span years or have a timeline horizon into the future that allows you to plan ahead. Also, many workers still receive their pay on a weekly basis. And with this structure, workers can often lean on the idea that their next paycheck is always coming around the corner without having to go weeks or months managing a salary. So even when they've grown into a space where they're earning enough and can start thinking long-term, they still are working on a short-term perspective, which affects this opportunity to build or train some financial management muscles and habits for the long term. A third key issue, as you've seen from our stories today, is increased vulnerability of migrants. Vulnerability in terms of the financial aspect, but also, as you've seen, to abuse or exploitation. Since you've heard a lot about the other cases, I'll focus on financial vulnerabilities. So a lack of access or barriers to service can increase vulnerabilities of migrants. Many migrants continue to be unbanked in their country of work or limited access to financial services. And this often means that a family member or members have to collaborate with the migrant workers in order to manage their income, family budgets, investments, building their homes, starting a business. This can represent large sums of money and income over time. So along the way, there are many risks because of accountability challenges and service challenges. And I would say that it's not a small percentage of migrants that experience being scammed or experience being fooled by different organizations or by people over time. But we've seen that almost every migrant worker that has come into our Tayo community has a story to share about a time that they were fooled by an ad online, or funds were mismanaged, or remittances over the years somehow disappeared or were used for other purposes. Because migrants often don't have this direct access or control to bank accounts or financial services and transactions, they remain vulnerable in these situations where there are weaker structures of accountability. And we see how the engagement in a community where you have consistent access to training and education and building your confidence in making these financial decisions can make a big, big impact. So again, these 3 key issues for migrants and financial inclusion. First, retiring without a plan for what's next, not being able to grow from a short-term perspective into a longer-term perspective, even when you have the resources to do so, and the vulnerabilities due to exclusion from services. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you to all panelists for your presentations. So what we're now going to do is we're going to open up discussion amongst the panelists. Now, because of the technical issues that we were experiencing earlier in the week in Damascus, we thought it would be safer for Vida to share a video. So what we're now going to do is play a video from Vida, which explores some of the topics that we are going to discuss. And because it's in Tagalog, I'm going to read out the commentary. Just before we begin, so this next session, we are going to be asking our panelists, what is the one unseen challenge or reality that people outside of their context may not be aware of? So this is a really opportunity for all of us to learn a bit more about what they see on the ground and what we might not be aware of. The second area is around what has the pandemic taught us about migration and financial inclusion? And finally, what interventions and solutions do we see working? So talking to these points now, we're going to play this video from Vida. Again, the commentary is in Tagalog, so I'm going to read it. There will be no sound and I'll read out the commentary in English. So this video we are sharing with you now is from TFC News Europe and Middle East. The original audio is primarily in Tagalog, so we're reading it out to you in English. Portions of the video or verbal content from the original video may not be included in this presentation. On June the 24th this year, 22 victims of trafficking in person were able to return home to the Philippines under the repatriation program of the Philippine government. For the very first time in the history of the Filipino embassy, the Filipino Workers Resource Center in Syria has been continuously vacant. This temporary shelter for Filipinos who have problems with work or with their standing in the country. This is part of the more intensified campaign of the embassy in Syria against human trafficking, with the appointment of a new head of post, Vida Soraya Verzosa, a human rights lawyer. Verzosa said, since the first day I arrived in Syria on the 20th of December 2020, the embassy has vowed to pursue strengthening the rule of law and achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, consistent with our obligations under the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. There were 56 wards in the shelter when head of post Verzosa arrived in Syria. Now all of them have been able to go home. Some of the wards stayed in the shelter for 3 years. When Verzosa began her work, she met with officials of the Syrian Arab Republic. She requested that the Filipinos would be granted presidential pardon and that their cases would be repealed, which is why they were more swiftly granted exit visas. Verzosa thanks the government of the Syrian Arab Republic for the excellent partnership with the Philippine Embassy, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates, Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs, Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice, and the Office for the Presidential Advisor. After a long negotiation and filing of the cases against illegal recruiters and human trafficking, thanks to the leadership of Verzosa, the last group of the wards in the shelter have been able to go home. The Honorary Philippine Consulate General Wasim Nanay in Aleppo, Syria, expressed his admiration for the repatriation of all the wards in the shelter. He said, I have the great honor to witness for the first time I became the Philippine Honorary Consul to Aleppo that the Philippine Embassy shelter is completely empty. As a Filipino citizen, I feel very proud of this achievement. Under the leadership of His Excellency Locsin, I feel very proud also of the very hardworking Vida Soraya Verzosa. The wards in the last group of repatriated Filipinos were overjoyed. The embassy continues to help the repatriates to chase and prosecute their illegal recruiters in the Philippines, Malaysia, Dubai, and even Syria. They are collaborating with the Philippine Overseas and Employment Administration, the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, and the Blas Ople Center. Verzosa reminds Filipinos that there is still an employment ban in Syria, so for those that would like to travel or work abroad, they are advised to go through the right agencies, such as the POEA, and to make sure that their recruitment agencies have the licenses that can show that there are job orders. She also advises that the workers not be fooled by human traffickers and illegal recruiters who make promises that they can travel on just a tourist visa. Thank you. That's the end. Thank you for sharing that news report, Vida. I suppose from your perspective, there's obviously a very specific context that's happening in Syria at the moment. What is the situation like on the ground now for Filipino migrant workers in Syria? Are they, you know, you alluded to the fact that earlier, actually, they should no longer be there unless they have very specific reasons, but are there still people there working in Syria that you're aware of?
Yes, thank you, Chris. So right now, based on the Ministry of Interior official figures, there are still 441 Filipino citizens in Syria. And of course, we think the number may be more than that. We estimate it to be around 1,000, because even despite the deployment ban, they still continuously enter through back channels. Like it's the modus operandi used by traffickers to recruit them from indigenous communities in Mindanao, literally put them on a boat to Malaysia. From Malaysia, they're shipped to Sri Lanka. From Sri Lanka, the jump-off point is either Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and that's how they get to enter Syria illegally. So the situation on the ground is, as you know, just like as shared by Ms. Marissa, not all of the workers suffer the intense situation that Lara went through under the very abusive, very exploitative situation. But the fact remains that because they are all undocumented workers, because they all didn't go through the proper pre-departure orientation seminars, they didn't go through the correct recruitment process of the POEA. So they are very vulnerable to abuse. And up to now, we still continue letting the public know that anytime they can go to the Philippine Embassy, and it's our mandate to provide assistance to them, whether it is making sure that they have access to financial resources, or even something as basic as getting a ticket for a repatriation flight back to the Philippines. And of course, the most important part, as shared by ex-dear Jerome from Blas Ople, is finding a way for them to have economic empowerment when they return to their communities. So at the end of the day, that's how you want to break the vicious cycle. You don't just focus on the protection aspect of combating trafficking in persons or the prevention side, but I think the most important part at this point would be through building partnerships with civil society organizations like Tayo and private sector groups like Blas Ople Policy Center, because government alone would really need all the help that we can get to make sure that we can protect those who are most vulnerable, that even in a place like Syria, which is still alert level 4, it's still under a lot of conflict at this point, despite the capital being rebuilt by the new reforms of the government. The situation is still extremely difficult for Filipinos everywhere, and that's why we all really need to work together. We all need to do our part in providing a helping hand, especially to those who need it most. So thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. And I suppose what I'm hearing there is that obviously these groups of migrant domestic workers, they're often in very vulnerable situations. They don't have access to services, whether they're financial or other assistance from governmental agencies or embassy services, because by definition, they're in a very vulnerable position. And you said, obviously, organizations, grassroots organizations at sort of the grassroots level that can assist are very important. I mean, how easy is it for migrant domestic workers, from your experience, to actually access these services in the first place? Or do you think there is still a significant number that are missing under the radar?
I guess there's no one-size-fits-all approach to answering that question. So there are some who can be part of the grassroots organizations, like the same way that Voice of the Domestic Helpers, they have a community group, and in the same way in Syria, they have the SAMAFIL, Samahan ng mga Filipino sa Syria, and FCS, Filipino Community in Syria, as well as other smaller groups. But not everyone would have access to that if in the first place, their employer will not even allow them to have a mobile phone, or they're not even allowed to step out of the houses. They remain trapped in that sort of abusive situation. That's why for us, we really need to work with the Ministry of Interior and file human trafficking cases to make sure that the law enforcement authorities here in Syria would be the ones knocking on the door of the employer, making sure that, hey, the Filipino who's there, they've got to be surrendered to the custody of the embassy instead of remaining in that sort of very difficult, very vulnerable situation.
Thank you for that. And moving on to you, Jerome, just on our first topic, is there anything that, from your perspective, one unseen challenge that you'd like to make people outside of your context aware about in this forum?
Well, yeah, I mentioned one earlier about the rising cost of deployment of overseas Filipino workers and for migrant workers in general because of additional restrictions in terms of health protocols and also increased quarantine risk requirements. So that's one. Add to that the fact that there were a number, almost 500,000 Filipinos were sent home last year because of the pandemic. So we now have here in the Philippines a pool of easy prey for traffickers who are really desperate to go out. So there's more incentive really. There's a lot of incentive right now for both the worker, the agent, and the employer to circumvent the process and forgo of all of the protective mechanisms that could protect your rights if you go through the usual deployment process for migrant workers. On a broader theme, there is a set of policy that is being enacted right now, especially in the Gulf states. There is even before the pandemic, there is an increased move towards nationalization of economies. So they are, while it is already a policy for most of them. So Qatar has already started it. Saudi has already started nationalizing some of the sectors. They were scheduled to nationalize the telecommunication and the retail trade sector this year. So it restricts the number of occupations that were protected from entry of migrant workers. And it's not just policy, it's also practices. So what's happening is that they're driving migrant workers further, especially domestic workers who in the first place, because of the nature of their job, they're already vulnerable to abuse. So they're driving them further underground. So what's happening is that they are foregoing a lot of the protection, and this also goes with the financial inclusion. That's why the Philippines, in its negotiation with Kuwait, has included it as part of the requirements that workers should be given access to a bank account and that salaries will be paid through their bank accounts, because there is an increasing trend also here in the Philippines to view financial inclusion, access to financial services, access to financial advice, also as a bridge towards protection. Because the more that people have access to these services, the more that we can see them. We see them not only physically see them when they go out and they avail of these financial services, but also we see them in statistics. We see that through their remittances that they are actually contributing. We see through their spending patterns how they are also helping the economies of their countries of employment. So it also helps reinforce the message that migration is a win-win solution for both the country of employment and country of destination.
There's some really interesting points that you've raised there, and I think you've touched on all three parts of our discussion there, and certainly around, which is great. Certainly what we've learned about from the pandemic. So actually, a lot of Filipino workers have been returned back home during that time, and I'm wondering from your perspective, what was your sense? And you do a lot of work sort of reintegrating that community back into the economy.
But it was. Yeah. To be honest, we want to report a high success rate for all of those that we've helped, but up to now, we still are not sure that they'll be able to sustain the livelihood that we help them put up or the alternative employment where we place them. And it's largely because our economy is also battered by the pandemic. The service sector is really down at the moment. We don't have the hotel, the Philippines is largely service oriented in terms of the makeup of its economy. So we're also struggling. So it's very difficult to come up with livelihood, very difficult to sustain it. It's not really the best situation. So we have to really do a lot of help. And to be honest, we're not sure if it's sustainable because there's a lot of input from the private sector, there's a lot of input from the nonprofit, there's a lot of input from government, which is good. And we are thinking that at the macro level, we are actually helping, restart the economy through these small businesses that we are putting up. But up to now, there's still a level of uncertainty, not only among us, but also among the OFWs themselves. You can feel it that if they are given the chance to go out of the country and to find work, they will surely grab at that opportunity. And again, part of it is that a lot of the people whom we felt, in the first place, they didn't have any savings. They don't have any plans when they, a message that we always send out is that when you go out, you should always have a plan for getting back to the country. The reintegration plans start at the moment that you decide to go out of the country. But sadly, most of the workers, because of their vulnerabilities, they were fighting for their lives during the whole time that they were employed. So it's not really at the top of their minds, not really their priority. So a lot of work has to be done on that end.
Thank you. No, I think you're absolutely right. And reiterating a lot of the messages that we've heard about the vulnerability of this particular community, the lack of prioritization over, say, planning to come back because of the challenges that they're facing. And also that the financial participation is a win-win for the country of adoption and also for obviously the migrant and the Philippines. So thank you for those contributions. I suppose just building on that, and Marissa, you work a lot with at a grassroots level with the domestic community, migrant domestic workers here in the UK. And I know that you've, through Tayo, you've started to offer financial education as a way to ensure that this community have access or are more aware of the services that are available to them and have some level of financial education. How important has that been to your members?
For so many years, so I think the Voice of Domestic Workers was born in 2009. So it was called Justice for Domestic Workers previously. And 2017, we registered it as charity. And I've seen, we've sent back many members who were sick, which is really sad. They left the country without nothing. And then they go back the country without nothing, and plus they are sick. And I think that the illness that I've seen is mostly cancer. So those we supported to return to the country are mostly with cancer. And yeah, serious, as you know, that because they're vulnerable situation, they're not being fed properly. So I think the stress, the way they've been abused, plus the stress on their own family. Yeah, so all this contributed. And I think that's why, actually, I want to do the research on why is the cancer is actually a killer disease of domestic workers. I think we can say so much on that. That's the reason why I'm very much on the financial education, training to them. And actually, the cooperative that we are building, the domestic workers cooperative, is actually born out of that. While I mentioned about the absence of the policy, that they don't have rights here in the UK, which a big problem, of course, because especially during the pandemic, they couldn't access the furlough support of the government. They couldn't access healthcare. So everything stops. They don't have bank accounts. They couldn't open bank accounts. So there's so many being undocumented. There's so many, all the problems actually. Plus the fact that because they are live-in, so the moment they lost job, they lost everything. Yeah. So and they have to start again from zero. So that's the work of the Voice of Domestic Workers, really focus on helping and supporting them to build their lives again, especially on the economic side. Yeah. And we always say that going home is not actually like for them, why they're so scared to go home. It's because they're not really financially prepared. So once we found them, we will always tell them that here in the UK, your 1 week, 1 month salary in other countries, here is you can earn that in a week. So that 1 week, that salary could be enough maybe to before when you're sending remittances, how much more here in the UK that your salary is times 4 or times 5. So we have to build, we have to discuss, talk more about that. And I'm really thankful of having Tanya, because Tanya can put it in a proper system, you know, but it's not easy. It's a big challenge because not everyone is attending it. So we're hoping everyone, come on guys, attend. This is really for you. But it's a big challenge on really providing them education, the empowerment that we want to, and the fact that we also want them to be an entrepreneur. And I think we're getting that, because actually we have already started the domestic worker cooperative, but I think preparing them to return that it's not really a failure, you know, that you're going home is you are rebuilding your life together with your family. I think that's the best thing we can give ourselves, you know, to ourselves, you know, and the present that we can give after working all through many years. You know, it is sad because sometimes 20 years they go back without nothing, and I've seen many of that. So that's why I look at ways, and I think we partner with the livelihood project of OWA, for the OWA, so they could have some business in the mine. Even I know some of them are doing that already. So it's a long process, but it's not impossible to achieve. It's just we need a lot of patience, you know, and discipline, you know, to make sure that it is achievable. I do believe it is achievable, and I'm really working hard to build this domestic work cooperative. And I have one question here from Noel in relation to pandemic. I mentioned about once they lost the job, they lost everything, and that happened in the pandemic. I think we supported over 150 of our members. Many of them lost their jobs. They've been terminated. They stop, the employees don't come anymore, so on the spot. And what was sad is the moment they stop working, they also have nothing. Yeah, so that's why the Voice of Domestic Workers had to fundraise money to be able to support them, and we did well in our fundraising, and we're very grateful to the public who donated money online so we could support them. And it's not just about food that we delivered, but also we provided cash. We provided rent, so because they become homeless, so we have to provide them the rent, and we even adjusted our charity policy. So it fits, so we won't be questioned by charity commission. And we're not like others that we give one off. We supported them for over a year. As long as they need it, we give them. So it's not one-off support. So until they found again job. But again, going back to financial education, yeah. So I hope many of them have learned from that pandemic. So and that they value already when they are earning. Then I'm sure Tayo has already built up in the education and empowerment, and I'm hoping that they are applying that, and that so if we don't want the pandemic to happen, but if ever it happens again, they are more prepared now in the future. And we're hoping, really, we're building a positive domestic workers who are, and you can see if you are with the Voice of Domestic Workers, you will see the modern domestic workers. They're fashionable, they're beautiful, they have hairdo, and yeah. So we want to see domestic workers like that. Yeah. Thank you.
Empowered and confident. Thank you for that. That's yeah. We've met so many members from the Voice of Domestic Workers, and we know the experiences they've gone through and the journey they've gone through and where they are now. So then that financial empowerment piece is super important as well, as you've said. And just we only have a bit of time left, so I'm going to move quickly on to Tanya, just to give Tanya a voice here. And I suppose just based on what you've heard, Tanya, here, what's your sort of perspective and take on what's been discussed?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's clear is really the cooperation between different agencies and groups to be able to support communities, that no one organization can do it all and give all of the support that's needed. And that's one great thing about this event, to be able to bring together different communities. I noticed for the people that are here, a lot of them represent our migrant domestic worker community. So to see actually that there are organizations and leaders that are wanting to bring to light their issues and the things that are important to them, that's a really valuable piece that we're able to share today. I did want to make sure, in terms of the unseen challenge, that I share one thing that I found very striking in the last few months of working close with a community. And it's been alluded to a little bit through this talk, but the loneliness and isolation and separation, that reality, I think, is really an unseen challenge, even for the families of migrants, to see that part of that, the dimension of being away from your family. We've seen from the stories how generous and how migrant domestic workers and migrant workers really are abroad because it's for their families' benefit. But the other side, the loneliness, isolation, separation, I think we've seen that when we've worked with our communities, that even just a short 30-minute call on Facebook in the room can actually bring a smile to their faces. And a lot of feedback we receive is just, you helped me feel released from boredom, or from, I was so lonely before I joined this call. And we realized that even though we focus on financial issues, that really we look at our community as whole people, right? And you can't just fix and tick the financial aspect. There's the physical well-being, emotional and mental well-being. So I did want to bring that to light, because I think some of us who live a different lived experience have not seen the pandemic through the eyes of our migrant domestic workers, who have been extremely isolated and separated from communities and their families. And just seeing the world through their lived experience allows us to provide better services that are relevant. And so I'm really I feel really honored to be able to see that side of their story and to be able to share a bit of that today.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid that we actually only have a minute left. And what we haven't had an opportunity to do, because there's been so much discussion, is put forward some of your questions. So what I'd like to do is, if I could ask Mitch to maybe leave the email address in the chat room for hello@taioteam.com. And anyone can email if they have any specific questions for our panelists or for us here at Taio. They can email that, or visit our website and leave us a message, and we'll make sure that as far as possible we're able to answer your questions. So we've had a really interesting and varied discussion here today. This is such a broad area, and I don't think we could do justice to this topic in just an hour and 15. And we've heard from our panelists based right across the world. And some of the common themes, we've talked about the vulnerability of the migrant experience, especially during the pandemic. And we've heard some quite shocking stories. And thank you all for sharing that and for sharing those stories. But also, there are lived experiences which are less extreme for migrants, but are still quite difficult and challenging. And we've talked about some of the issues that they face around financial exclusion, the lack of planning, the fact that there isn't necessarily a long-term plan or a plan to get back home, and that they are financially quite vulnerable in those circumstances. I suppose the lack of access to financial services and the lack of financial participation. We've heard on this panel that actually it's so positive the more that migrant domestic workers or migrants have access to those services, that you can see a a much bigger positive contribution when they have access to these services. And I suppose because of that vulnerability, a lot of the migrant domestic workers fall under the radar. And is it ever possible for us to know how many are actually out there and don't have access to these services? So we also talked about the important role of cooperation between organizations, grassroots organizations, embassies, financial institutions, to make sure that we're reaching out to as many of these migrant workers in whatever position they're in. So it just leaves me to say thank you all to our speakers. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope you've all learned something, and if you have enjoyed this talk, please connect with us at Tayo. We'd love to run more of these events and talk more on this issue. So thank you all for joining, and a very special thank you to Vida, Jerome, Marissa, and Tanya for sharing your thoughts. And all the work that you are doing is fantastic. And I feel we have so much more to learn from all of you. And I really look forward to being connected with you again in the future and having more discussions with you. And if you ever come to London, please give us a call. We'd love to take you out for some Filipino food here in London. And obviously when we're in the Philippines, if we can all meet up there too, great. But thank you all. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
much. Take care.